Thank you very much, and thank you, Jay Edmonds, for a very interesting note. I, of course, also have a few remarks about the Paris Agreement and its effects on global transitions towards a low-carbon future. The Paris Agreement was a turning point in international climate cooperation. It was a historical agreement. I think for the first time in history, we managed to make a global agreement with commitments of almost all the nations in the world. Of course, we had the Kyoto Agreement, but that was only a handful of rich countries that had made their commitments there. But the Paris Agreement was a truly global agreement with global commitments. And the Paris Agreement is a great tribute to multilateralism. It managed both to ensure the universal participation and to enhance climate efforts significantly. Its rapid entry into force also proves its inclusiveness and its reliance. The Paris Agreement aims to strengthen the global response to the threat of climate change by holding the increase in the global average temperature well below 2 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial level, and pursuing efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. To underpin the mitigation objective of the agreement, two additional long-term emission goals are articulated. Firstly, the emissions is to be peaking as soon as possible. This will take longer time for developing countries. Secondly, the Paris Agreement puts forward a goal of achieving a balance between emissions by sources and removals by sinks in the second half of this century. The Paris Agreement also establishes a global goal of enhancing adaptive capacity, strengthening resilience, and reducing vulnerability to climate change. The Paris Agreement commits all countries to put forward their best efforts and to strengthen them in the years ahead through national determined contributions, the so-called NDCs. And the intended NDCs committed by countries in 2015 were a critical enabler for the Paris success. However, it was clear from the onset that the aggregated effects of the INDCs submitted prior to Paris would not take us to the ultimate goals of the agreement. Still, we insist that the NDCs form one of the cornerstones of the Paris Agreement. And the next question, of course, would then be why? This is because the current NDCs serves only as a starting point. The agreement is designed to steadily increase ambitions over time through several mechanisms. First, each party shall communicate and maintain NDCs every 5 years that represent a progression beyond their current NDCs and which reflects its highest possible ambitions. This is the key driver for ambition in the Paris Agreement. And secondly, also every 5 years, we will take stock of our collective progress, which will then serve as a key input to our domestic processes of reviewing our NDCs. This 5-year ambition cycle means that the Paris Agreement, although not delivering on its goals in 2015, but did set us on the pathways to a low-emission future. Let me also say that ambitions by developing countries are underpinned by a commitment from developed countries to provide finance for mitigation as well as adaptation in developing countries. This is also a key feature in the Paris Agreement and an integrated part of the dynamic global framework to tackle climate change that it represents. The emission gap remains a tremendous challenge. Responsibility now lies with the countries themselves to ensure that we deliver towards the objectives of the Paris Agreement and that we significantly ramp up our action to close the emission gap. Committing to plans is easier than acting on them, and the hardest part of all is achieving them. To understand actual investment needs and priorities, it is also vital to look beyond the NDCs and at specific sector plans and other activities taking place at the national or sectoral level. as well as business-driven investments, which are taking place in parallel, both locally and across borders. According to Bloomberg's latest new energy outlook, we will need about $560 billion in yearly renewable energy investments in order to have at least 50% charge of keeping global warming well below 2 degrees. This figure behind me, which is also made by Bloomberg, shows expected capital energy investments in different regions of the world in a period from 2016 to 2040. The black and gray color in the figure shows the investments in coal and gas. The red shows nuclear, then the blue and yellow shows the investments in renewables. Thus, Bloomberg expects that renewables will constitute a major part of capital investment toward 2040. And this is, of course, good news. The next figure I will show you shows a comparison of Bloomberg's and the International Energy Agency's scenarios of expected installed capacity for renewables in 2020, and 2040. And as you see, the IEA 450 scenario, or the 2 degrees scenario, requires a 5.2 gigawatts installed capacity. The IEA scenario, covering new policies, including NDCs under Paris, expects only a level of 3.3 gigawatts. However, if you also look to the Bloomberg scenario in the upper left corner here, this shows an expected installed capacity of 5.9 gigawatts, which is considerably more optimistic scenario than the IEA has put forward. Even though we as politicians, of course, has a responsibility and a commitment to reach the Paris Agreement, we cannot do this by ourselves. Public funding, at least not through funding, public funding is insufficient to cover the global energy demand in the years to come. Clearly, it is necessary to mobilize private capital. The private sector was a crucial driving force behind the Paris Agreement. This was because they wanted a strong signal about the direction of travel, which is precisely what the agreement provides. Paris offers a long-term vision and a clear and credible signal to governments and the market, also to the energy market. Those signals guide decisions and plans on capacity development, investments, and strategy. It bolsters the market dynamics, which is already making renewables competitive at a rapid pace. A lot of different companies are looking for the business case to invest in low-carbon technologies, infrastructure, and business models. They need reassurance that the parties to the agreement will deliver on our NDCs. In addition to the signals from Paris, we should also have in mind the effect that the G20 may have on the private sector. Norway strongly supports the German effort to make climate a priority for its G20 presidency and an explicit linkage between energy and climate. Deployment of renewable energy and energy efficiency will contribute to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 7 on universal access to sustainable, reliable, and affordable energy services, and at the same time avoid or reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the energy sector. Scarce public economic resources should be used to leverage private and commercial investments in renewable energy and energy efficiency. Lack of enabling frameworks, whether they are fiscal, regulatory, or institutional, create barriers for investments. Supporting enabling frameworks and capacity building should be a priority for the G20 countries. A difficult question is how governments can use the momentum from the Paris Agreement and to stimulate further to a green energy transition. It is crucial that governments shape their climate and energy policies and measure it in a way that make renewable energy sources competitive in the energy market. Fossil fuel subsidies does not stimulate the transition that we need. It does exactly the opposite. The International Energy Agency estimates that consumer subsidies alone amounted to nearly $500 billion in 2014. This is equivalent to almost 4 times the level of official development assistance aid from the OECD countries in 2013, or almost 4 times the level of total government support to renewable energy, which was $135 billion. The good news, however, is that fossil fuel subsidies actually went down last year to $325 billion in 2015, down from $500 billion. However, it is too early to say that this is a lasting trend, or if it's maybe a temporary response to the low oil prices. And we are still talking about massive amounts of subsidies, which are clearly working against our efforts for a green energy transition. Speaking about government incentives, I would also like to draw some attention to the EU Commission's winter package, the Clean Energy for All. This package includes very interesting and extensive proposals to stimulate the energy transition. This package is a key part of the EU's 2030 climate and energy framework. The EU is seeking to promote energy security, sustainability, and competitiveness in the EU's energy sector through measures and initiatives in 5 priority areas: energy security, a fully integrated energy market, energy efficiency and moderation of demand, decarbonization of the economy, and research, innovation, and competitiveness in the energy field. Through this package, the European Commission also looks at consumers as active and central players in the energy markets. The proposals aim to give the civil society more opportunities to become more involved and respond to price signals. The proposals in the winter package can affect Norway both directly through the EEA agreement and indirectly through the impact on the European energy market. In Norway's NDC under the Paris Agreement, we have committed ourselves to emission reductions of at least 40% in 2030 compared to the 1990 level. Norway intends to fulfill this target jointly with the European Union. The EU member states welcomed this in September 2015. An agreement on joint fulfillment implies that the EU's climate framework for 2030 will become relevant for Norway. This includes both the EU emissions trading schemes, the EU ETS, that Norway already is a member of, and the effort-sharing regulations for non-ETS sectors. Parts of the proposed EU governance regulation will also be relevant for Norway, and this includes integrated governance of both the climate and the energy targets. The EU ETS covers industry, energy, and petroleum, while the effort sharing covers transport, agriculture, buildings, and waste. Norway will get a national target for the effort sharing sectors, established on the same terms as for the EU member states. Norway is mentioned in the EU effort sharing regulation with a preliminary target of 40% emission reductions compared to 2005. This will put Norway together with Luxembourg as the country with the maximum target of 40%, and of course the highest within the EU, reflecting that Norway's wealth, of course. Participating in the effort sharing for the non-ETS sectors will give a more systematic and predictable framework for the Norwegian climate policy. There will be an annual emissions budget, annual reporting requirements, and possibly sanctions if the emission budget is not fulfilled. Under the effort sharing mechanism, we have to prepare for a situation where we will need to reduce most of our 40% cuts domestically. Norway is already, as I said, participating fully in the EU ETS. Today, there is a huge surplus of emission allowances that we know are weakening the price signal in the carbon market. A low price on allowances reduces incentives for transition and low carbon developments in the ETS sectors. However, the amount of allowances will be reduced towards 2050, in line with the EU climate targets. And closer to 2050, there will be far less allowances available. Thus, emission reductions and low carbon transitions in the ETS sectors are crucial for these sectors to be competitive in the longer term. Norway has a long-term goal of becoming a low-carbon society by 2050. Emissions must be reduced by 80 to 95% in 2050 for Norway to become a low-carbon society compared to 1990. This requires a major low-carbon transition of the Norwegian economy as a whole. In 2015, the Norwegian government established an expert committee with the mandate of proposing a strategy on how Norway can create green competitiveness. This expert committee had extensive dialogue with the private sector, challenging the business community to present roadmaps for carbon development toward 2050. And as the expert committee put it, the challenge gained increasing relevance following the Paris Agreement, declining costs from renewable energy, and the low oil prices. Leading companies from 11 different sectors accepted the challenge and presented their low-carbon roadmaps to 2050. An ambitious example is the roadmap that was presented from the processing industry. Their aim is to double their production and at the same time achieve negative emissions by 2050. The report from the expert committee and the roadmaps are important for the development of a Norwegian strategy for green competitiveness. The Norwegian government welcomes the involvement from the private sector and their contributions to this process. This shows that the private sector highly prioritizes the transition to a low-carbon future. And the Paris Agreement, as well as domestic climate policies and targets, has a considerable signal effect. This gives us reasons for optimism regarding the effects also on a global level. So, with these words, I would thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the coming panel discussions. Thank you very much.